Could I ask if some people could show their screen so I know that there's some people alive, so I'm not talking to myself? If that's possible, thank you. Great. I know it's annoying, but it's helpful for me to see a few faces at least, to see if, you know, I'm going slow, fast, and these sort of things. So thank you. Okay. So what we will go to, so first of all, you can see my screen, you can see the PowerPoint, right? Okay. What I want to talk about today is really sort of a bit of the theoretical background for some of the more advanced measures that have been proposed at the individual level. And they're going to be the basis for some of the next days as well. So you will see that, so next days, next sessions. So so it is quite an important lecture, and I'm hoping many of you can attend this as best as possible. So I'm just trying to double check if there's anyone waiting in the waiting room. Can't see anything happening there. So if you know of any of your colleagues that are waiting, let me know, and I'll try to organize this. I'm also going to put the chat on so that I can see if anyone has some questions. Good. It takes me back to the good old days when things were online. Okay. So we're going to talk about, so what we did up till now was really talk about centrality measures, and centrality measures really from the perspective that basically flows of information through a network. And actually tomorrow I will come back to that. I think I will probably do this again online tomorrow, just to be sure. So 11 o'clock tomorrow or 11:15, we'll do another online session. And then I'm 99% sure I will be completely recovered next week, Wednesday. So you will see me again in person. By the way, also, I did my COVID test. I don't have COVID, it's just a stupid cold, because I was so stupid last week on Saturday to basically say, you know what, I'm going to go to the mountains and, you know, just have a little bit of a walk, which was good going one way, but then going back, it turns out there was a bit of wind, and I think that's where things went wrong for me. So, okay, I blame the Trento weather for this, you know. I'm not used to this anyway. So I would suggest that also we just do this online, and then next week I'm 99% sure I will be completely recovered. It's taken me 4 days already, but it should get out of my system soon. Yeah. So triads and structural holes. So what I want to talk about today is really about a bit of theoretical arguments that have been made. And so what we're still going to look at is individual level, but rather than look at centrality measure, we're going to look at measures that sort of integrate things like, are my friends connected with each other or not? So triads as groups of 3 people. And the idea is that groups of 3 people really have an extra additional aspect to them that we don't have, that we haven't captured sort of in a classic way, at least not with degree and closeness and vector centrality either. So before doing that, I really want to talk about social capital a little bit. And so I don't know if you're familiar with social capital. Have you encountered social capital as a concept already? Well, if you have, you probably know that social capital has very different meanings for different people. And so this is why I want to talk a little bit about this. This was actually what I did as my PhD, my doctoral dissertation. I talked about social capital. This was in the time that social capital was still a big thing. And it frustrated me because basically everyone had a different idea about what social capital was. And so if you look at Goleman or Bourdieu or, you know, Portes or other people, they basically have all their own idea about social capital. So I'm going to just briefly go over this, because I do think it's important to know that there is a diversity of ideas about what social capital is. And since social capital has been connected quite a bit with social networks, you know, not doing that is sort of neglecting a little bit the past 20 years of research. But the end result, what we actually aim to do today is to talk about, okay, what if I'm person A, B, or C? What would be the advantages or disadvantages of being in any of these three positions? If we don't finish this today, that's fine. We can go back to this tomorrow. But this is sort of the end goal. The end goal is to differentiate between person on the left, who's connected with 4 people, and they're all connected with each other. Person on the right, a person that's connected with 4 people who are not connected with each other, and a person in the middle who's connected with sort of 4 people, again, so the degree is the same, but where 2 of them are each connected with each other. So they're like part of 2 groups, sort of like a butterfly almost, that this is. Yeah? And so we are sort of interested in which of these is a better position for a person to be in. Now, in order to talk about this, let's consider social capital. And so as a sort of basis for this, I'm going to use Ron Bird. Ronald Bird is one of the leading figures when it comes to structural holes. He's the person for structural holes, which we'll talk about later, but also has talked quite a bit about social capital. And so from his perspective, social capital is, it is not a definition, it's a description. It's not the best description, but it has a lot of aspects that we can talk about, which is why I want to really go over this. So he talks about social structure as a kind of capital that can create for certain individuals or groups a competitive advantage in pursuing their ends. Better connected people enjoy higher returns. So the first thing to note is that he defines social capital as many social network researchers as social relations, social structure. So it's very much a structuralist in that way. That's different than, for example, James Coleman, who talks about social capital as norms. The idea of norms that allow you to go outside. So if we share common norms, it allows us to go outside to do things without actually without fear. Yeah. We'll come back to this. We'll come back to this sort of distinction, because it will have some effect on some of the later things as well. But so one of the things is, when you talk about social capital, some people see it as social network, social structure, relations between people. Others, that sort of networking. The other people see it as sort of norms, things that exist in a society, and that's the social capital. It's like what we commonly, agree on, things like that. Now, social capital is a kind of capital. There's other types of capital. There's financial capital, human capital, cultural capital. So if I talk about social capital and cultural capital, who is the person you would think about first? You can either say this out loud, or you can post it in the chat. So if I talk about cultural capital specifically, who is the person to talk about cultural capital? So I'm looking specifically at the sociologist here. Bourdieu, yes. And why Bourdieu? Because Bourdieu talks about habitus, right? And habitus and the idea that you can switch between capital. So human capital, or other types of capital that he has different words for it sometimes. financial capital, maybe cultural capital and social capital, and the idea that you can switch between them. So, for example, if you think about the old, in sort of the second industrial revolution, the old aristocracy, they had cultural capital. They were like the people that were the elite. But there were new groups of people emerging that became more important when it came to economic capital. They were the new driving forces of the industries, second industrial revolution, I think even the first industrial revolution. And so they gained economic power, but they didn't have the cultural capital. Cultural capital in two ways. Cultural capital in knowing how to speak, what to do, how to belong to the elite, but also how to enjoy the opera or the elite cultural aspects, so cultural with a capital C. And so from that perspective, they had to trade these things between each other. So what happened is that often you saw intermarriages between sort of the new elites and the old elites, where the new elites benefited from the cultural capital from the old elites, the titles, the things like that. I'm thinking about the UK now specifically. And the old elites benefited from linking with the new elites because they were losing a lot of money, and because agriculture was not important anymore that much, they sort of could get this from the economic capital to maintain their status as well. So these are examples where capital can be exchanged between things. But capital can also be exchanged between, social capital, social networks, and sort of, the benefit you can get from that. So the networking aspects of that. Okay. Now, the problem I see with social capital is that whereas cultural capital, human capital, financial capital, you can really assign it to a person, right? So you have a specific amount of financial capital, human capital, cultural capital. And, it's either in your brain, or it's in your manners, or it's something that you physically have, like money, things like that, houses, and so on. Social capital is a bit more difficult to measure. So if I would ask you, okay, what's your social capital and who owns social capital? So imagine that you have friends and these friends give you benefits. The question is, do you own your friends? Because unlike the other capitals, you don't, it's something that you don't really own. It's something that exists. And so the question could really be like, okay, if you think about social capital, is it something that a person has? Is it in a relation? Do we have social capital because we are connected? Is it that if I'm connected with someone and the other person has some things that, that person has the social capital? Or is it a community as a whole that has social capital, which is more a community approach to social capital? Each of these are different approaches to thinking about social capital and where it sits. And that's one of the first problems with social capital, that you can't pinpoint it. You can't say, it's there, because it's in a relationship partly, especially if you take it from a social network perspective. And we're going to do that because we're taking course in social network analysis. We're not doing a general sociology one. So you have this sort of question, right? So that's one of the difficulties. And then one of the things that is interesting is when people talk about social capital, they generally talk about something that has a benefit for people, because it's sort of the idea, if a network relation has a benefit for a person, it's social capital. If it doesn't have a benefit, it's not social capital. So if we have a relationship, let's say we have a friendship relationship, and you benefit from being connected with me, but actually you ask me constantly questions about R and so on. That's beneficial for you of having a relationship, of having a network relationship. But that might be a social liability for me. It might not be that I get a lot of benefits from that. So if that's the case, now we're actually saying, well, the same tie is social capital for you, but it's not social capital for me. So how do I have to operationalize things? And so from that perspective, Coleman actually talks about social capital as a sort of social capital is something if you can get benefits out of it. So let me say it another way. He compares it with a chair, you know, the thing that you can sit on. He says a chair is a chair if you can sit on it. If it loses one or two legs, you can't sit on it anymore. It's not a chair anymore. Yeah? So you define it by the outcome that it has, rather than by describing it. You say, okay, it's only a chair if you can sit on it. But that also means that I can sit on other stuff. That becomes a chair as well. And so that's the way he thinks about social capital. He sees social capital as it's a thing that gives benefits to people, or that has positive effects on people. So what if, and so in some ways you can see this as a tautology, because now if I find that the outcome of something is not beneficial, I'm going to say, oh, you know, let's say I calculate the number of friends that each of you have, and I see whether the people that have a lot of friends actually have higher social, higher well-being. I find that that's actually not the case. I now have to say, oh, but I did the wrong thing. I measured social capital by taking the number of friends. I should not have done that. I should have taken into account whether you can get social support from them. Here, do it again. I again find no effect. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. I did something wrong. I still didn't capture social capital right. So you see, what I'm actually doing is I'm post hoc, after the fact, reinterpreting what is social capital and what's not social capital. And I think that's one of the reasons why the concept of social capital has sort of disappeared a bit. It's become less and less important. You know, if you read papers from 20 years ago, you will see a lot of papers that talk about social capital, well-being. In fact, social capital was not the first concept. Before that, social support in the 1980s, social support was a big concept that was being used for looking at well-being and things like that, because people were looking at ego networks and the social support they get from that. So social support, including instrumental support, emotional support. So this is one of the challenges. And not only is it a challenge because we're redefining them based on what the outcome is. So it's only social capital if it's beneficial. But we also have another problem. We think about social capital, and when we think about social capital, we can think about social capital as social capital for an individual, so having benefits for an individual, or benefits for a group. And so here's where, again, there is some difference. So for example, if you think about Ron Burrett, he talks about friends, colleagues, and more general contacts to whom you receive opportunities to use your financial capital and human capital. So social capital for an individual. But others have looked at this as social capital flows from the endowment of mutual respecting and trusting relationships, which enable a group to pursue shared goals more effectively than would otherwise be possible. Notice here, social capital is seen as something at a group level, something like cohesion. Remember the first measures we talked about, cohesion measures? That's actually more the second definition. It's the social capital that's the level to which there is mutual respecting, trusting, you know, interactions, these sort of things. Community, social capital. The first one, so, and that's related with, for example, the bowling alone argument and things like that. The first one is far more individual, sort of more networking. The second one is not so much networking. The first one is more like, okay, you have your contacts, it's individual benefits. And this is where you can have a conflict sometimes. For example, it could be that by working in an organization, by having a lot of relationships in that organization, you are actually able to get a job in another organization. Yeah, you grow in this organization, you get all the information from them, and you take this to another organization. So it's social capital for you because you get promoted in another organization to a next level, but it's actually really disadvantage for the organization as a whole. So what's individual social capital does not have to be group level social capital. We can take the opposite effect, or the opposite approach. Think about criminal organization, and think about mafia specifically. So a mafia organization works very well because there's a lot of dependence on each other, right? And so the same networks that ensure that the organization works, that ensures that everyone follows the rules of the organization, the mafia organization in this case, it can be very detrimental for the individual in it, because that person has to follow, is restrained by these links and might have to do whatever the organization says. So again, it's social capital then for the organization, but it's not for the individual. So what I want to show is that there is not, so even though we said, okay, social capital is the network relations that give benefits, now the question is, benefits for whom? For the individual, for the group? Even in the dyad, is it for you or for me, having a friendship tie? So there's a lot of questions there that you could ask. And this is again an example where if you read literature, if you look at social capital, people have used the word. Think about these dimensions. What are they talking about? Are they talking about so Putnam's bowling alone, for example, which is a community approach, or the absence of community in this case, because that's the argument he's making? Or are you taking a more individual perspective, where you think about benefits that a person can have by doing things? And this is where another aspect comes in. Another aspect in this definition that's very clear, that actually is one of the main dimensions as well, is whether social capital is something that you actively pursue or something that just happens to be there. So, for example, James Coleman in one of his papers talks about social capital depends on being a byproduct of activities engaged in for other purposes. So he sees social capital, even at the individual level, as something that's unintentional. So let me give you an example. So imagine that you end up being friends with someone, and this friend happens to have a Ferrari. Isn't that great? Now you can drive a Ferrari. I mean, I'm assuming if you have a driver's license. So it's a great thing that you happen to become friends with someone and they happen to have this. So I'm saying happen to as a sort of, it's unintended. You hang out at a bar, you meet this person, and it ends up being a person that's very rich, or that has something that you really want, or that you value, let's say that way. One is certain intention. So that's a byproduct argument. The other approach is really the networking approach, which is, and so I sort of have this definition here, this approach here. So Becker supposes that people choose social networks in ways that will maximize their utility. So it's a very much a networking approach. First one is a network approach. Second one is a networking approach. A network exists, and networking is an activity of doing this. So you can think about networking as, for example, you see someone that has a Ferrari, and you're following this person until you see that this person is going to a bar, and then you make sure you wait half an hour until they have a few drinks, or maybe 2 hours until they have a few drinks, and then you give them a free drink. And you're hoping by giving them a free drink in return, you might drive the Ferrari from time to time. Okay, I'm making up some story, but it's the idea that basically you actively pursue some things. These are two different approaches to thinking about social capital, even at the individual level. And so the question is really, which of these approaches combined of, is it networks versus norms? Is it, something that is at the individual level, at the group level? Who are we focusing on? Is it an active or passive aspect? All of these dimensions, I think, if you read a paper, I would always think, okay, where do they stand on this? They might not explicitly say it, but they might implicitly have this sort of idea. And also, remember that when we talked about this part here already, the group, there was this shared goals in there, right? And these shared goals, that's already a start of going towards the direction of existing norms, shared ideas about what we should do as a community, rather than, what I want to do to get better, to become better. And so the question, of course, is, okay, well, if we do if you use a network approach, what is better connected? What can social network analysis do to then identify these things? And so as we saw, it might be very different things depending on what your outcome is and what you're focusing on. But still, let's look at some possibilities here. Now, in order to do that, the first thing we're going to do is actually talk a little bit about theories on social networks. And so I want to talk about a few very basic theories that exist, that are, networky type of theories. The first one is general balance theory. And so general balance theory, I know this is outdated, but, you never know what happens in 2 years. So, this might be in the future rather than in the past. Okay, I don't want to scare you too much, but I see a real possibility here. So imagine that you have two people, and Stan and Kyle. You probably know where they come from, South Park. And imagine that Stan is a real hard believer in Trump, and Kyle is a real believer in Joe Biden. So imagine that, and actually I shouldn't say imagine, I would say, think about a situation where you're friends with someone and this person believes something that's completely opposite of what you believe in. I'm pretty sure you must have had this experience in the past, right? The question is, what do you do? And now I'm going to make this an extreme world. There's a world of friends and enemies. There's no world of I can be neutral about a person. You either are friends or you're enemies. So one of the things I really like is negative ties, because they're interesting, far more than friendship. Friendship is a little like, but negative ties, that's the interesting part. So imagine that you can only be friends and enemies. Yeah? So you have a friend, and this friend has completely opposite beliefs to you, or music taste, or taste, in something that's relevant to you at that stage in your life. What do you do? Don't be shy, just write down your thoughts, it's fine. I'm just going to, for a moment, disappear. I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, no answers yet. There are only two solutions. Okay, so Camilla is going to influence the other person. Yeah, or the person tries to influence you. So both of these are possible. It's basically social influence, so social contagion, right? So one way could be to influence each other. Go back to this. So one way is to basically say, oh, I can convince Stan that actually, Joe Biden is really the good guy and Trump is really the bad guy. Or I can just decide to become enemies with each other. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure, but it's possible that you might have ended up breaking up with a person. I mean, not breaking up like a relationship necessarily, but like friendship relationship breaking up. So yes, it could be that you detach. But let's say if you detach, you really have to go towards, I hate this person, rather than just say, I can be neutral about this person. In the world of, in this world here, there's only friends and enemies. There's no neutral. Yeah? But detaching is then more like, okay, I'm done with this person. I'm not going to talk with this person anymore. I tried and over and over and over again, and it didn't work. And there's an emotional, aspect to it, which makes you really not want to connect with this person. So that's two ways you can deal with this. You can unfriend a person that's different, or you can try to convince the other person. So social contagion versus sort of selection, but then unselected persons. So if you think about the world that's like existing like this, now we have sort of 6 people, where some of them are Trump supporters, some of them are Joe Biden supporters. What could happen is that you become friends with people that are similar, and you remove friendships with people that are different. That generates often already a sort of subgroups in a network. You now have the sort of group, you have more connections within what's called homophilous relationships than heterophilous relationships. Homophilous means you're connected, the tendency to connect to people that are similar to yourself on some specific characteristics. At the same time, there might also be social contagion, social influence going on. So that basically, if you're surrounded by a group of people that are all Joe Biden supporters, you might become a Joe Biden supporter. You either do that or you stop being friends with both of them. And here, the Joe Biden supporter might become a Trump supporter because they're surrounded by Trump supporters. The consequence of that is that you have little groups where everyone has the same beliefs, which is what we see a lot in the US politics, especially these days. They could be the result of 2 things. It could be because, basically people convince each other in the same group that the right opinion is that, and they sort of could distribute the fake data to others that makes them also believe this. Or it could be that you just select and deselect, so that you basically, that people actually in society are more becoming detached from people that are different and more connected to people that are similar. So sort of a cocooning type of approach with respect to this. So this is 2 different things which we can just already, based on a very basic principle of the idea that you prefer the overall general balance theory, you prefer to be connected to people that are similar to yourself. And it's a basic principle that we see in a lot of social network research. There's an extension of that, or a different version of that, which is Heider's balance theory. And Heider's balance theory starts with the idea that we're not talking about whether the 2 of us have an opinion about something, but our relationship with a third person. So imagine the following situation. So we have Kyle, Stan, and Eric. Now, Stan likes Kyle and likes Eric. Yeah? But Kyle doesn't like Eric and Eric doesn't like Kyle. And again, I want you to think about real life. I'm pretty sure you've been in one of these situations where you are friends with someone who's friends with someone that you hate, that you really dislike. Not necessarily hate, but dislike. Or you're friends with 2 people who dislike each other. You're a Stan person. I'm pretty sure you must have had a situation like that. That's you're in an unbalanced situation. And again, unbalanced. Why? Because basically, you have positive feelings towards two people if you're Stan, and they don't like each other. So that can generate conflict. You invite them to a birthday party, and you're like, can I invite both of them to the same party? This is going to be messing up stuff. I can't do this. So I have to organize two birthday parties. Or even worse, you're Kyle, you invite Stan to your birthday party, and Stan brings Eric with him, and you're like, what? My birthday party is ruined. So, these sort of things are situations where imbalance happens, right? So when is imbalance? When there are two positive ties and a negative tie. And again, there's no neutral here. There's either positive or negative. So what are solutions to bring this into balance? Think about your life. What did you do? Okay, so Camilla says we are going to break the relationship. So if you're Kyle, Camilla, then basically you're saying, okay, I'm stopped being friends with Stan because every time I hang out with Stan, Stan brings Eric with. And so that's going to be a difficult situation for me. Yeah? Or if you're Stan, you basically say, okay, Kyle, is always been struggling with Eric because Eric is really nasty to Kyle. So I end up not being friends with Eric anymore. Yeah. That's both possible. So one thing is to find balance by having a common enemy. Actually, that's a good basis for friendship and for trust. There's research that has shown that actually, instead of having, common friends, it's actually better to have common enemies. Because if you have common enemies, you can talk about them, gossip about them, you can really reinforce your feelings about things. So that's a good basis for strengthening your relationship. And it's reinforcing this feeling that you share not politics, but beliefs about how people should be. So the other way is what Alberto was saying is maybe what you're trying to do is to basically become a mediator. And so what you then can do is instead of stopping the relationship with Eric, you try to convince Eric about how good Kyle is and Kyle about how good Eric is. And so you negotiate in order for them to become friends. Exactly. So there are two possibilities here, and which direction it goes to, it really depends a little bit on also how important these friendships are for you and things like that. But in general, this is a balanced situation. All three happy friends, and this is a balanced situation. They're friends and they have a common enemy. And this person is also okay normally with this because it's like, oh yeah, there's just a group of losers. Yeah? That's a self justification for yourself to say, okay, I don't need Stan. Stan was really stupid. He chose Kyle. I'm going to find other friends. Again, it's something that we see in school classes quite a bit, right? So, but not only in school classes, we see this also among adults in organizations and other places. Okay, so again, what could happen then is if we take already into account that we had this sort of homophily effect, this sort of selection and influence, contagion and selection. So selecting people that are similar on respect to views and influencing each other. What you can have is that then what happens is still that now that you become a group with similar views, you become more negative about the other group. So there were only 2 negative ties here in the world. Now there's more and more negative ties that emerge, because what you want is a balance where these 2 people think like, this person doesn't like this person. Now this person is going to tell this person, well, actually hate this person as well. So it's a reinforcement where not only do you get positive relations within, but you also get negative relations between the groups that are strengthened. Just because of what we talked about before, right? This sort of, it's an important aspect to have common enemies. What we often see with social identity theory is that identity as a group emerges partly because there's an outgroup. There's another group that we are not part of, that we can say is different. Yeah? It's easier in society to build that than to build one homogeneous group where everyone loves each other. Again, this is something that could happen. There is a paper a year ago that was basically talking about this sort of process, that in order to understand group processes, groups emerged in classrooms, it's not only necessary to have positive ties processes, but also negative ties. That they're really reinforcing this sort of group process. I could give you the reference in a bit about this. It was actually a special issue that we edited on negative ties. As I say, I like negative ties. Okay. Having said that, we now move away from negative ties and positive ties, and we're going to move towards just positive ties. Yeah, so positive ties or instrumental ties, but non-negative ties. And this is where Granovetter's strength of weak ties comes in. Yeah? And so I'm going to give you my view about Granovetter's strength of weak ties. There may be a little bit different variations on this, but the way I see it is that Granovetter's strength of weak ties starts. By the way, this paper is one of the most cited papers in sociology and social sciences. Classic ones at least. Although it got rejected the first time it was submitted. So when Granovetter submitted it, he got a rejection letter. It's sort of one of the famous rejection letters that's out there, because it's like, one of the best papers got rejected by one of the top journals and ended up in another journal instead. But anyway, that always gives me hope when my paper gets rejected, that I can say, like, probably it's still a good paper, it's just a Granovetter situation. Anyway, I had this Monday, so one of the papers got rejected, so I have to go back to this. So what's the starting point of Granovetter? Granovetter's starting point is a forbidden triad. And what's a forbidden triad? The forbidden triad is the following principle. So let me again try to make you think about your friendships. But now let's not just think about friendships, let's think about strong friendships. Yeah? So these ties here are strong friends, strong friendship ties. In Granovetter's words, they are related with reciprocal services, frequent interactions, emotional, strong connections, things like that. So he says it's a combination of these sort of things. So I want you to think, and I hope everyone can participate with this, and also raise your hand, like, in sort of virtual way otherwise. So think about 2 of your good friends. Yeah? Are you okay with this? 2 of your good friends. Okay. Now think about whether these do they know each other? That's the first question I have. If you raise your hand, if these 2 friends that you just randomly chose among all of your good friends, if these two good friends know each other. Okay, I see. The virtual part is a bit more difficult to know if now nobody is answering or just... In any case, I'll focus on the moment on the people that I can see. I think most of you were saying, yes, they know each other. And I see 2 people like, three people online that I can't see. Well, yes, so they know each other. Yeah. It's a high chance that if you have two good friends that they know each other. Why? Because they're good friends. And you have a birthday party and you invite both of them to your birthday party, right? And so they meet. Or you might be good friends because you have similar interests. So I have the same interest, I do the same sports, I like the same music. I go out in Trento. There's, I think, 3 pubs after midnight that are open. I sort of it's a very different situation than where I used to live in London, where I couldn't end up hanging out with students or things like that. Here, if I would go anywhere to a pub after midnight, I'm pretty sure I will run into some of you. Very different situation than London. Anyway, so you go somewhere, you like something, you go to this type of music place, jazz or whatever you're interested in, and if you're friends with 2 people, the chance that your friends are similar to yourself are high. So you're highly likely that if you're Stan, that Eric will have the same taste as Stan, as you. But also the chance that the other person has similar taste is also high. So by itself, Eric and Kyle have a high chance of having a similar taste as well, due to the fact that friendship is more likely to emerge among people that are similar in taste and things like that. Yeah. So there's a high chance that you would meet each other, that these would meet each other. 2 of your friends would meet each other. Moreover, there's also distance aspects. Often friends, they are going to be in specific locations, so they have a high chance that they will run into each other as well in other ways. And then they might say, "Oh, look, it's a small world. I know Stan, and you know Stan as well." Exactly. Now, I wouldn't say it's an absolute necessity, because especially these days, we tend to have friendships with moving around in Italy or in Europe or things like that. We might have friendships from when we were little, and we might have friendships from when we were in high school, and we have friendships now from university, and they are different groups, right? So in some ways, we don't have to necessarily have that situation, but so it's a probabilistic aspect rather than absolute. So it's like, if you have 2 good friends, the chance that they know each other is high. It doesn't have to be. Reality, it's not always the case. But let's suppose it is. Let's suppose that if you think about 2 good friends, they will always at least know each other. I want to ask the second question. So think back to these 2 friends of yours. Are they good friends with each other as well? So raise your hands if they're good friends. Okay, it's a lot less. It's actually quite a lot less. Okay, no, it's getting better. It's still more than chance, but it's not necessary that they have to be good friends. But they will. It's very likely they at least have met each other. Sort of a weak tie. A weak tie in Granovetter is you are acquainted. You know each other. Not only know of each other, but you've met each other. So the forbidden triad principle is the following. If you think about 2 good friends, they should at least have a weak tie. They might have a strong tie, but they must at least have a weak tie. So this is possible. What is not possible, what's the forbidden triad, is the idea that if you have 2 good friends, that they do not know each other. So and let's take it absolute. Let's make it absolute rather than probabilistic. It's actually probabilistic, but let's make it absolute in the sense that we say, if you have 2 good friends, they need to at least know each other. Yeah? Is that okay? Good. That's actually the starting point for Granovetter. So Granovetter's starting point for the strength of weak ties is actually the idea that if you have consider 2 good friends, 2 persons, friends, and they're 2 good friends, then these friends should be at least weakly connected. And why is he going to look at this? Because he actually wants to look at how people get information about a new job. Where if you would ask people, so where did you get information about a new job? Now, First of all, this is the 1970s. No internet. Yeah, that's one thing to remember. Two, this is the US, right? It's a little bit, I would say it's a bit specific to the US as well, in the sense that in the US it's more common to find jobs through people than maybe in Europe is the case. That was the case. But we come back to this. So let's apply this to a long time ago, I have to say. A long time ago, I did this sort of gossip magazine reading, and I did this to just find out the network of Britney Spears. Now, you know, it's again a hype, so I can do it again. So when I did this, this was 15 years ago, I think. So, you know, when Britney Spears was at the top and she was, you know, she had this breakdown where she shaved her head and so on. Well, you might not know this, but that was happening sort of 15 years or so ago. That's when I built these slides. Yeah. So I'm just saying, I know this is out of date, but let's go with this, because this was the moment that I was like, be able to figure out some of her network. So Britney Spears at that point had two good friends. And we're going to apply Granovetter's strength of weak ties in order to, and bear with me. I know this might sound a bit stupid, but there is a story behind it, a scientific story. Yeah. So Britney Spears had two good friends, Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan. So two good friends of Britney Spears. So these are two strong ties, thick ties. So what should happen here between Lindsay Lohan and Paris Hilton? According to the forbidden triad principle, yeah, at least a weak tie. So exactly that's the case. They should at least have a weak tie. It might be a strong tie, but at least a weak tie. In fact, it was a strong tie. So they hang out together all the time, and you know they were having parties together and so on. I know at some other point they that they fell out with each other, but I think it's back okay. So you know everything is good in the end. Anyway, strong tie, weak tie. At least there is a triadic closure happening. So it's not an open structure. So let's look at another tie that Britney says. Britney had a hairdresser, Ken Pavas. Now, a hairdresser is generally not a strong tie, it's a weak tie, right? It's someone that you talk with, you go to the hairdresser, you need to talk with the hairdresser because, you know, you're like there for half an hour or longer, I don't know how long. So you have to talk with this person. So it's a weak tie, but it is a connection. So what should happen if this is a weak tie and this is a strong tie? What should happen between Paris Hilton and Ken Pavas? Nothing, right? So the idea is if you have two strong ties, then it generates a weak tie. Because two strong ties means you invite them to your birthday party and so they meet each other. If you have a strong tie and a weak tie, you invite a strong tie to your birthday. You don't invite Ken Pavas to your birthday. So there doesn't have to be a connection between Paris Hilton and Ken Pavas. Okay, good. Ken is also the hairdresser of Avril Lavigne, or was the hairdresser of Avril Lavigne at that point. So that's a weak tie. So what should happen between Britney Spears and Avril Lavigne? Nothing, right? Two weak ties, no restrictions. The only restriction is two strong ties generate a weak tie. Now, Ken Pavas, let's imagine he has two good friends as well. What should happen between this friend and Britney Spears? Nothing, weak and strong. But what should happen between the strong and the strong tie? At least a weak tie. Yeah, might be a strong tie, but at least a weak tie. And let's just assume that these are hairdressers as well. Let's assume that Ken Pavas is friends with other hairdressers, just to make it a little bit more simple. Okay, we're getting there. almost. And Ken Bavis is also the hairdresser of Eva Longoria, who is an actress from Desperate Housewives. Weak tie. What should happen between this and other connections? Nothing. Okay, Eva used to be married with Tony Parker, who is a basketball player. So that's a strong tie. If you're married, that's really strong tie, right? Should be. And also she was really good friends with Nicolette and Felicity. She didn't like Terry that much, apparently. So that's a weak tie only. You could even make it a negative tie, but we don't think about negative ties in Granovetter. We only think about strong, weak, and no tie. So what should happen here? There should be connections here, right? Okay, so we build connections here. At least weak ties, maybe strong ties. Okay, good. I'm using this not because I want to show off that, you know, I know the story of Britney Spears and the connections here. I want to show you this because what if we take away the people and we look at the structure? What we see is groups, clusters of people that are densely connected, emerging. And these connections are between people where there's strong ties. Because this is strong ties that generated weak ties, that generated closure. So the idea of Granovetter is, if we have forbidden triad principle, then the strong ties will generate clusters, will generate what he calls social circles, areas where specific information exists. So let's go back to our question. Imagine that Britney Spears wants to know where to get a new job. Well, she might ask her friends, but Lindsay and Paris, they share everything with Britney already, so there's not a lot of unique information anymore. So where can she get new information? She might get information from Ken Pavis, who might tell her that one of her colleagues is actually looking for a hairdresser to help in one of the businesses. Yeah, so imagine that they are hairdressers. She might get information from these people to get a hairdresser job. But Ken Pavis might also have heard from Eva that actually Tony Parker is planning to build a female basketball group. Yeah, and then he's looking for female basketball players or cheerleaders, and that basically through Eva, Ken knows this, and Ken tells this to Britney, and Britney is like, "Oh, that's great! I want to do this." Yeah. So that's the idea of Granovetter. The idea of Granovetter is it's through these connections that you get information that's unique, that you wouldn't otherwise get access to. Also actresses, if you want to get an actress job, you would get this through these connections. Or take a role in exactly Desperate Housewives. Yeah, so these sort of things. Exactly, but which connections are they? Are they the strong connections? No, they're the weak connections. It's the strength of weak ties. It's a wordplay. It's a weak ties that are important. It's a weak ties that connect different social circles. And why is that? Forbidden triad principles. If this would be a strong tie, then there would be connection here. And there would be connection here. And this would become one social circle, one blob, one group where everyone has the same shared information. And so that's not giving you access to things anymore. But it's the fact that it's a weak tie, because weak ties do not have this clustering tendency. And so that's how you end up then connecting between different social circles. Yeah. And because these social circles tend to also have different characteristics, I'm trying to do this here by saying, you know, these are all singers, these are hairdressers, these are actresses, these are basketball players. So you have these different types of things that you get access to. That's the strength of weak ties. And it all follows from a very basic principle. Try the closure of strong ties, forbidden triad principle. So that's basically the story. So structural bridges being linking between groups of people cannot happen through strong ties. They have to happen through weak ties. So these weak ties cross social circles to get unique information. Unique information because each social circle has sort of shared unique information. And so Granovetter talks about, in his original writing, he talks about these clumps, these strong tie networks, would not in fact be connected to one another at all were it not for the existence of weak ties. So think about, you know, you're moving to Trento or you're moving to another place and you need to find a flat or a share a flat or things like that. How do you get this information? Well, up till a few years ago, I would say Facebook, for example. Nowadays, I don't know it anymore where you would do this, but you would have someone posting something like, I'm searching for a flatmate, and then that person would then post it, ask it to be reposted to other people who then repost it, and then you might see this from your friend who posted it from someone else, who posted it from someone else, and these Facebook friends are generally not strong friendships. Most of the Facebook friends tend to be weak ties rather than strong ties. I'm not sure what I would say these days would be the equivalent, because I don't think Facebook is that popular anymore. By the way, maybe tomorrow it's not called Facebook anymore. They think about, it still is? Okay, good. I'm still popular. I'm still up to speed with the young people. Anyway, so that's the type of thing that basically we're talking about. Now, weak ties are useful, but they're useful for a specific type of information. They're useful for information that's easily transferable, like where to find a new job, where to find a flat, where to find maybe a bike that's, I'm thinking about the Netherlands now, sorry, where to find a bike that someone stole that, you know, you can then buy from them, these sort of things. You know, very basic information that's easily transferable. For more complex information, it's different. Think about, you need support with, for example, figuring out how to use R. And you want to use R for multi-level analysis or something like that, or for some program. It's generally not the weak ties that will help you here, because the weak ties do not carry a lot of possibility for spending time with them. You can't ask your hairdresser to spend half an hour with you, or an hour or 2 hours to explain something. But you can ask your friends, your good friends. And so, of course, what Granovetter says, and 10 years later, he sort of has this update on this paper. He says, well, weak ties provide people with access to information and resources beyond those available in their own social circle. But strong ties have greater motivation to be of assistance and are typically more easily available. Your friends, if you're in the middle of the night, need to call someone, you can call a good friend. You cannot call your hairdresser, right? Or an acquaintance that you know, anyone on your Facebook profile, on your Facebook page. Okay, good. So that's sort of bringing us to Granovetter's strengths of weak ties. And I hope it sort of clarifies that, you know, this is what you can see happening in your networks as well. Not as deterministic as what is here, but in some ways. Now, before I want to go on, I actually want to say something else, because I noticed that I didn't have this slide here. Or you know what? No, I'll come back to this tomorrow. I'll come back to this tomorrow, because I do think we need to have a few slides with things on there to explain this. So do remember that what we saw here. Okay. Another person that really talked about sort of close triads and triadic closure and things like that was Georg Simmel. Georg Simmel, German sociologist. I think he's German. not completely sure now anymore. But Georg is not very German in name. He is, okay, good. Good. Just wanted to double check because I know that Georg is sort of more a Hungarian name or something. I forgot now, but something like that. Not a very German name, I thought. Anyway, Georg Simmel, German sociologist. So he talked about triads in a sort of a way that he was like, okay, you know, if you think about relationships, dyads are not interesting. And why are they not interesting? Because they're just relations between two people, you know, and, you know, there's nothing interesting. What's happening, what's becoming interesting is when you have a group of three people. Why is it interesting when you have a group of three people? Because if you have a group of three people where everyone has the same power to start off with. So it's not like you have three people and one is a boss and you two others are employees, right? That's a different situation. So think about three employees or three of you, three students, you know, so I'm not part of the group of three because otherwise the balance is not even. But think about the group of three. And think about you being friends with each other. The idea is that basically that has a dynamic that's going beyond the dyad. And to give you this example, what I always think about is, imagine that you have friends. I mean, I don't think that's an imagination. Imagine that it's exam period, and one of your friends knocks on the door and says, "Shall we have a drink?" You probably will be like, "That's this situation here, right?" You're probably like, "No, I have to study." Right? But now imagine that you're in a situation where two of your friends together come to knock on your door, or three of your friends knock on your door and ask you to go for a drink. It's a lot more difficult. And the reason why it's more difficult is because you basically have pressure from a group. There's more than one person that's trying to pressure you. And the idea of Georg Simmel is that basically, if we assume equal power to start off with, then two people can join forces to make the third person do what they believe to be interesting or what they believe is sort of what they want to achieve. Yeah? So if they want to go for a drink, they knock on your door. It's far more difficult to say no than if just one person knocks on the door. So there's a coalition building that reinforces, that sort of makes it stronger than just one person. It's also stronger than two people separately. If A knocks on your door and says, let's have a drink, and C knocks on your door and says, let's have a drink. Okay, that's two times the same thing. But if both of them are in the door, it's a lot more difficult. So there has to be a relation between A and C as well for this to really work. So there's close triad makes that people can build coalitions to force others to do what they want. Again, it's not deterministic, but it makes it more likely. Is that okay? Okay. Good. Let me go back now to the first story. I think we have time for two stories still. And then it's, I wanted to say then it's bedtime after the two stories. Sorry, stupid joke. So the first one, and it's all related with these things here, right? So the first one is basically, so if we would use if we would use Georg's approach of coalition building, and you think about social capital as a group level thing, like norms being enforced, which of these situations do you think is best to be in? Is better to be A, B, or C? Sort of guiding you in the direction of the answer. not sure. I think some people are typing, so I'm going to wait one more minute. A few more seconds. Yes, so in the last one, it was people knocking on your door to making you drink. But now let's, instead of talking about drinks, let's talk about something very simple. Doing what the community wants you to do. Think about a situation that you want everyone to follow the rules in your city. If you're in this situation, what can happen is that you can build coalitions with other people to basically force anyone that's sort of trying to be a free rider, that tries to break the rules, to basically enforce them to follow the rules. So from a social capital perspective, and norms, as James Goleman talks about, it's good to be highly densely connected because it makes people do what the group wants. It reinforces group norms. It ensures that nobody is trying to be free rider, tries to do antisocial behavior. It's a controlling society that's actually seen as good. Yeah. That's the social capital at the group level. It's the dense networks, the cohesive networks that enforce trusts. I always have to think about some American small communities where, you know, everyone knows is looking at each other just to double check that they're not doing anything wrong. But it's probably from watching too much television. But what's related with that is that it enforces norms. It makes sure that nobody can do things. Here, C doesn't have that power because C can try to force this person to do something. But the only thing C has is a dyadic negotiation. It has connections, but the other connections are not connected with this one here. So it can't force this person here to do what the group wants because there's a lack of connections among the other things. Let's forget about this one for the moment. It's basically between A and C. And the idea is basically that if you have that situation, if you have closed triads, it ensures that people do what the group wants, and that means that there is trust that you can have. And trust, if there's trust, well, it's actually control. Trust and control are sort of opposite parts of a similar thing. Control reduces cost of monitoring and transaction constantly, because you know that the other person is not going to do anything that's stupid. Let's say not stupid, that's not beneficial for you as well. So let me give you an example. Think about organizations, companies. So imagine that we are a company and we're going to trade with each other. Now, you know that if we have an agreement, anything you sign, there's always some small things of margins that can go wrong, right? And that we might not be able to identify in the contract. So how can I trust that if I want to buy something from you and I pay you beforehand, that you will actually deliver, for example? Well, I can trust you if I know that, for example, you're trading with people, with organizations that I'm trading with as well. Because what happens is a reputation aspect. So imagine that you're actually not delivering what you're supposed to do. Now, I have my other connections, the other companies I work with, and I can tell these companies, you know what? This company is not doing what it's supposed to do. And what can happen is you're not only losing me as a customer or as a relation, but you're also potentially losing other people in this. So you're also, your potential cost loss is a lot bigger than just a relation with me. You have the possibility that your reputation is being undermined with other people, with other companies. And you don't want that. And so because we're in closed triads, that's a sort of extra safeguard that I have to be sure that you're not going to mistreat me. That's basically another version of Hyder's balance theory. It's the idea that we have connections with each other. We can force people to do things, because the danger is that not just one tie disappears, but multiple ties disappear. Here, that's not the case. So if the blue dot here suddenly thinks like, oh, you know, I don't need C anymore, I got the money, I run away. I mean, apart from legally, you know, trying to follow things up in court, there's not a lot of other options here, right? So you will have to be more careful as C to make sure that B is doing things. And so you might be more careful about giving them beforehand all the money. It might be like, I'll give you one thing, but you have to give me something back already, or show me that you're in the stage of doing this production. So these sort of situations actually create a broader normative order within which individuals can optimize performance in a sort of organizational perspective. They ensure that everyone is using the basic starting point and there's no race to the bottom because there is potential consequences, big consequences. So that's sort of an application thinking about it theoretically. Of course, it could be also better to be in this situation. So one of the things I'm also thinking about is imagine that imagine that you have a partner. Now, I mean, I'm not saying imagine that you have a partner, like not a friendship, or a real partner. If you have common friends, there might be a difficulty there. So it might actually force you to stay together a lot longer. Because if you don't, you get a negative tie. Hyder's balance then kicks in. What happens? Hyder's balance, negative tie, you have common friends. Your friends have to choose between you and your ex-partner, right? So it's an example of Hyder's balance theory, and also an example where I think actually there might be pressure from a community, for example. So, I mean, now I'm thinking about the classic Italian city where, you know, you meet your life partner in high school, and they're in the same town, and your parents meet, and they make, you know, and you marry, and sort of this sort of thing. I'm sorry, it's my imagination of the classic Italian small village, and you know, there's a lot of pressure for you to stay together. It's very difficult for you to actually divorce, right? Because of that. So again, it's a trust situation that emerges. It's a trust that nobody will actually break the marriage. So this can go in either direction. It can be really difficult to follow, or it could be something you know, helpful, but it can also be very constraining in some ways. Yeah. Okay. I think I will finish here for today, and we'll come back to this tomorrow. So some more slides, and so tomorrow we're not going to do R. We're just going to go back further on this sort of theoretical arguments, and then we're going to see how Ron Burritt actually takes the opposite view, and how that's related with social capital. But I also want to talk about small worlds and 6 degrees of separation, which I forgot to put in the slide, so now I have the opportunity to add them for tomorrow. Yeah, and then we're going to talk about the scientists. Of course, there's always going to be a researcher who disagrees with both of these people and says, no, you're both wrong. And that's going to be David Krackaert. So we'll talk about David Krackaert as well, and his view about Simmelian ties. Okay, good. That's it for me for today. So I'll send the Zoom link out later today, latest tomorrow morning. Let's meet at 11:15. Yeah. So thank you for staying online for this long. I hope you have a great evening, and I'll see you tomorrow, 11:50.